Can everyone hear me? Great. I'm just going to set up, and while I'm doing that, I really wanted to thank the organisers for inviting me to speak. And I also wanted to thank our interpreters too, and to say that, yes, I am speaking English. I am from Australia, so there may be words that I use that you don't understand, but you'll be pleased to know that I'm not going to use the term "g'day, mate." So, this paper we offer in the spirit of sharing experiences, and it's been a really fascinating journey for me over the last day and a half to hear about European experiences and to reflect on the context of where I come from, which is Australia. So we're talking about today a real-life case study, and I mean real life because it's going to be slightly warts and all in terms of what we had to go through to improve the energy efficiency in our iconic public building, and also to ensure that we carefully preserve the heritage values. And in doing so, we've really enhanced the story of the building itself, which is one of our primary aims, and you'll come to know why I say that in just a moment. The other thing that I wanted to do is present this paper in the context of a couple of conversations that's going on in the heritage and collections sector, which I work in, and that really is the sustainability of the built environment, but also the environmental standards of caring for collections as well. And some of you will no doubt be aware that there are very strict standards about humidity and temperature control, which for a lot of public museums like mine is actually quite an impost. And so we've been looking at the ways that our building can contribute to some of the research, practice-led research around how to use the building mass in order to help us achieve lower costs in terms of collection storage. Does that work? Yes, so Australia. This paper comes from the Museum of Australian Democracy, which is at Old Parliament House, and Old Parliament House is located in Canberra, the capital of Australia. And there's the building within its context. It's located right in the centre of the parliamentary area. So an area very much designed with public spaces and grand vistas in mind. There's the front facade, or part of it, of the building, and you'll notice that it's a 20th century building built in 1927 and housed the Federal Parliament until 1988. It's located, as I said, right in the heart of Australian government, and it captures the ideas, movements, individuals and events of Australian democracy. It was the home to Federal Parliament, and it also is a place that has an incredible array of engineering heritage. So another important part of the building is not just its spirit, what happened there, its significance, but also the built fabric. Today it's a museum, and as I said, it explores the spirit of democracy and the power of individual voices within that. We welcome over 300,000 visitors a year, and we have a collection of 40,000 objects and a really active exhibition program which involves loan items not only from national institutions, that is Australian institutions, but also international ones. And that's why the care of collections is also a big part of what we're trying to do in terms of looking at our energy efficiency. So that as well as the environmental controls for visitors as well. So collections, staff, visitors. Here are just some images of inside the building. It has parliamentary chambers, and the fabric inside has a very high integrity, so very much intact from the 20s right through to the 80s, showing a whole lot of change. But it also, as I said, has a significant in situ collection of furniture and objects. We have exhibitions, and this is a photograph, as you can see, of an object that is part of our collection, but equally could be a loan object. So we have heritage spaces and exhibition spaces. So now to the beginning of the story of the regulatory context of the project that we undertook. We have the EPBC Act, which is the Environment Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act, and that governs legislation in Australia at a Commonwealth level, so at a national level. And that's important because it not only governs our building as a building listed under the National Heritage List, but it also governs a degree of environmental operations as well. So we're governed not just under the heritage, but also under the environmental. It also governs, in Australia at least, matters of national environmental significance, as I said, such as how we deal with our World Heritage properties, all the environmental wetlands, a threatened species. The Great Barrier Marine Park Authority also comes under this Act, and water, which is an incredibly important resource in Australia. The National Heritage List is the list that Old Parliament House is on, as well as on the Commonwealth Heritage List. This is a slightly old slide from their website. We have many more sites on the National Heritage List. You can see that most of them are in the southeast corner, and most of them are built. It does govern Indigenous sites as well, but it's often the case that those are not listed as readily as European built environments. So to our project. This is now the back of Old Parliament House, and it housed the functions of the building, dining, recreation areas, but also importantly for this project, all of the ancillary functions, so the plant rooms. And it was important for us in considering how to upgrade our boiler project, as I've said in the abstract, that we made sure that we took into account the building's history. And that was touched on yesterday in terms of how the building can help you make decisions about where and how you're going to improve efficiency, what sort of equipment you're going to use, where are you going to locate it. So I say that in the context of, in a minute I'm going to explain a little bit about our research that we did and some of the fantastic options, including renewables, that was put to us. But in the context of thinking about the heritage values, the users of the building, we had to make sure that we undertook thinking in terms of the heritage location of the original boilers, in terms of maintaining the continuity of use. So we weren't going to turn spaces that had not been designed for this use into those plant rooms. That has happened in the past, and it certainly is not a practice that we want to encourage. So we had a review of our system undertaken by some engineers, and it became apparent that the current boilers, which I've got a photograph of here, were reaching end of life. They weren't very efficient. The heating water distribution system was operating inefficiently, and the pumps were operating at too many hours at high speed. So the cost in terms of energy and money was very high. because we had to make sure that we had these 24-hour museum quality environmental controls. So back again to the regulatory environment. So we have our heritage legislation that we must comply with as a site on the National Heritage List, and then we also have the Australian Government Energy Efficiency Standards. This is about government operations and is one of a series of pieces of legislation that come under the climate change legislation, the energy efficiency legislation in Australia, and it governs primarily public buildings. So Old Parliament House is an agency under the Commonwealth Government, and therefore we're public servants, and therefore we need to make sure that we comply with government legislation for public agencies. So under this policy, we had to reduce our energy consumption, and to try and meet the 4.5 stars on the Australian Building Greenhouse Rating, which for a heritage site is actually quite difficult. This policy has been written for offices that occupy new buildings or tenanted spaces. So trying to match our operations in a heritage site to those obligations that other agencies have were quite difficult. So under the EPBC Act, we have what's called a Heritage Management Plan. So it's a conservation management plan that helps us make decisions, and it really targets the use of significance in order to help us make decisions to manage change. And we also, in Australia, have the Australia Icamos Borough Charter as well, which again is about managing change. It's about taking into account users and significance and values in order to make change. So I'm going to go reasonably quickly now that I've only got a minute to go, is that right? Yeah. So this slide shows that we did do a great deal of research in terms of thinking about our boilers and our heating upgrade system and what it was that we wanted to achieve, and the many different options that we had available. Now I have this report on me, if anybody is keen to have a look at it. I'm not an engineer, I'm not an architect, so I'm not an expert in this, but happy to share the information. We also looked at renewables, and there was a lot of talk about that yesterday in terms of what the impact was going to be aesthetically and on the heritage values. But I guess more importantly, also, was it actually going to achieve what we wanted to achieve? We needed to reduce our energy consumption. We needed to make sure that we're maintaining museum quality conditions. Is this the most efficient way? And as it turned out, it wasn't, for various reasons that I can go into later. But it was certainly an option we considered, even though it would have been quite a tricky prospect for us to manoeuvre within this parliamentary triangle, which in and of itself is governed by a range of different heritage management plans and a range of different legislation. So a picture of the original boiler, just to go back to another important aspect in terms of maintaining tradition of use, but whilst improving efficiency, was the fact that we needed to use our old heaters. So we had to make sure that we're continuing a practice of use. A whole lot of photographs of the plant room. And again, thinking about the heritage values, we wanted to retain as much of this original engineering fabric. This tells us a story, this tells us about the building, it tells us about Australian life, it tells us about equipment and technology at the time, and we certainly didn't want to get rid of that. But it was hard to insert new boilers into this space. So, current Parliament House at the top there, old Parliament House at the base of the slide there, and this is what I was talking about in terms of thinking about the holistic nature of the project. So, 1 minute to go. We chose a design that was a mixture of condensing boilers and conventional boilers, and those of you with very much more knowledge than me will know that that's a combination that it was more expensive for us, but certainly provided much more efficiency in terms of our energy needs. So not renewables, we're using gas, but in terms of meeting the needs of the project, the overall goals, we certainly have achieved that. And also needed to clean up the system a bit. Again, trying to find all the different ways that we can make the system more economic and efficient. Part of the project was that we needed to maintain museum conditions. So this is us with a temporary flue. I'm going to go quickly through here, some heritage surprises. And also, again, back to the regulatory environment. It won't be news to those of you who work with retrofitting buildings that there's a whole lot of fire regulation, health and safety, and planning that we needed to achieve. And one of the innovative projects, aspects of the project was the fact that we had to come up with a purpose-built design cap to make sure that the acids were not going back down to the flue, but also didn't sit up above and interrupt that parliamentary vista. So, just a couple of vital statistics about the project, and I just wanted to close with just a couple of thoughts. And one is that you can see here there's a number of different trades involved, and that was one of the really big aspects of the project, was working with industry and to respect their knowledge and get them to respect ours. And we've developed a great working relationship to the point where some of these guys are now going to their conferences to talk about this project and the pride they have in their work. And the other areas that we're working on, again, as I said, in terms of collection management, is thinking about the building mass and how we can ensure that by using ugly but temporary insulation such as this, we can actually turn off the controls in those storage areas and use the building in order to create those stable environments. And we're also doing our own research so that, again, we're coming from a position of knowing our conditions, our building and our collections in order to make those decisions. Thank you.